Hello friends, today you will see an important feature of your camera and it helps you in your practical photography. This is a bracketing. Bracketing is a photographing a series of the same image, tweaking a single setting as you shoot. This results in a range of images that can serve various practical purposes. Typically, the term bracketing refers to the changing exposure during the multiple image capture. In other words, bracketing is a gathering frames at various light steps. This can be done to choose the best exposure or later combine the photos for one image with more dynamic range. The end result of the latter creates work more attractive and truer to the human vision. You can bracket for any settings. If you take a series of the images at the different focus point, that is the focus bracketing. You can see I am taking 3 images at different focus points. After that I will composite in the Photoshop. I will share its result later. First we talk about exposure bracketing. Exposure bracketing is typically done with the shutter speed. Keep in the mind that if the shutter speed is changing, your subject is moving. Any motion within the frame can cause problem in the compositing later. If you are in a low light situation without a tripod, you will want to ensure that the slower shutter speed in your bracketing range does not dip below handheld territory. This helps you avoid blurry images you did not notice while you were snapping away. First you will learn about exposure bracketing. Let's go. If you only shoot single exposure and don't have to worry about full tonal range, bracketing might not apply to you. For practically everyone else who has not used this technique, bracketing expertise is handy in many situations. Like any beginner, I started out taking single exposure, then moving into different genres. I became familiar with the bracketing through the popular processing method known as a HDR. You will watch HDR later. Most modern cameras come with an option to a auto bracket. Once auto bracketing is selected, decide how many frames you did like to capture and set the range between each of those stops accordingly for the instance. If you did like a series of 5 images are taken with just a single stop of a light between them, your camera display should look like this. Auto bracketing is great for the handheld shooting. After choosing your auto bracket setting, set your shooting mode to the burst and capture everything you need with one prolonged depression of the shutter. This way your image will be easily to align since little movement is during burst shooting. But I recommend you can use a tripod to avoid any alignment issue. Tripod is a must in a manual bracketing. Manual exposure bracketing involves pushing your camera dial between each exposure. This is the best achieved on the tripod. Though you can also do it handheld. The downside to the hand holding while manually bracketing is that your frame might jump around each time you move the camera dial and depress the shutter. This can produce problem when aligning images later on. One advantage to the manual bracketing is that you can push the camera as far one way or another as desired to gather dark or bright data, instead of relying on the set range of exposure to capture what you need. After you have taken your series of bracketed photos, you will merge them in the post-processing. You have two options available, HDR and compositing. You will watch both options later. First you need to show how you set your exposure bracketing in your camera. So choose auto exposure bracketing on your camera menu. Then choose the number of shots in your bracketing sequence. And then choose the amount the selected setting vary with each shot. Select AE bracketing for auto bracketing set. The camera will display number of the shots and increment options. Highlight numbers of the shots and press 4 or 2 to choose the number of the shots in the bracketing sequence. At setting other than off, a bracketing icon will appear in the display. Highlight increment and press 4 or 2 to choose the bracketing increment. When 1:3 step is selected for the custom settings, the size of the increment can be chosen from 0.3, 1:3, 0.7, 2:3, 1, 2 and 3 exposure value. The bracketing program with an increment of 0.3 means 1:3 exposure value. The camera will vary exposure shot by shot according to the bracketing program selected. The modified values for the shutter speed and aperture are shown in the display. Modifications to exposure are added to those made with the exposure compensation. While bracketing is in the effect, the display shows the bracketing icon, a bracketing progress indicator and number of the shots remaining in the bracketing sequence. After each shot, a segment will disappear from the indicator and number of the shots remaining will be reduced by 1. You can also cancel the bracketing. To cancel bracketing, select off for the number of the shots. Now come to the HDR. First thing first, an essential tool for any type of the bracketing is a tripod. Sometimes you can get away with the handheld shots, but it is risky and can result in a disappointment. The general plan is to set your camera on the tripod. Select a bracketing mode in your camera setting. Most cameras have it somewhere. Please refer to your user manual. Select an appropriate number of the brackets for the scene. Set camera on 2-second delayed shutter. If you have the timer set, the camera will take all the brackets automatically. You won't have to click the button many times. It prevents the slightest camera movements and makes the blending easier. The best practical I use remote code to release the shutter and use continuous shooting. First come to the exposure settings. The big question here are how many brackets and how big is the distance between them when it comes to the exposure value. Let's watch. Exposure value determines an exposure compensation and it is a term used for the bracketing. So exposure value 0 is the exposure your camera would pick automatically. Exposure value -1 means its exposure is the -1 stop. One stop equal to the double or half amount of the light the camera receives. So exposure value minus halves the amount of the light. Exposure value plus 1 doubles the amount of the light. Modern cameras are advanced with the high dynamic range. Because of this, I see no need to create brackets with just one stop between them. There are two types of the bracketing setting that I use. 2EB-2 for most cases, exposure value 0 or exposure value -2 for the most scenes, exposure value 0, exposure value +2 and exposure value -2 for the real estate interiors and other high contrast scenes. Much for the Lightroom CC or Lightroom Classic. If you have a Lightroom Classic or CC, you can create HDR images right with the Lightroom itself without having to buy a plugin.